Look, you're in a category, there's a bunch of other folks. What actually makes you different? It turns out you can't copy someone else's founder story. You can't copy someone else's values and just have them show up. You have to actually live them and breathe them.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Category Champions podcast. Today we have Chris Savage, the CEO and co-founder of Wistia. Wistia has created a new category around how businesses and marketers use video to create trust and connect with their audiences. In this podcast, he will talk to us about how they created the strategic narrative of Wistia. He will break down what's the old world, what's the new world, what's the change that dramatically created this separation. He will share with us how he thinks about competitors, how he thinks about shows and podcasts, how he thinks about measuring how the story is working or not. And he will talk about how B2B brands can think and act like a media company. It's a great episode, so let's jump right into it. So, Chris, tell me about what's the story or the strategic narrative that Wistia shares with the world. Is there a framework that you use to build your story? Is there a North Star story that guides sales, marketing, product, recruiting? Is there one unified story that you guys have? And how did this story come to be?
Yeah, I mean, so, the story that we try to share with the world is all around really helping other people tell their stories and using video to do that. And there's a lot of reasons why that is. Video is such an emotional medium. I would argue it's the most emotional medium in the sense of like, we're hardwired as human beings to connect with other human beings. Like we like to see faces. We like to see people talking. That's how we establish trust. That's how we also will question if something's real or not. And, we've been in the video space for an incredibly long time. And that's like, we've just seen that become true for us and for our customers. We've also seen that like building trust, it takes time. Like if you see one TikTok for 10 seconds, someone might get your attention, but it's not until you see many, many of those and you follow someone in all these other arenas and you spend time with them and you watch their video podcasts and you listen to that's how you build the trust over time is with time. And so in our world, that's like helping people really, thinking about their brand and also the affinity to their brand affinity. And that's something that's just been really powerful. It's worked for us. We've seen it work for our customers. And it's also in a world with infinite content, which we basically have today. And I mean, AI is going to make it even more infinite. How do you compete and how do you stand out? And every connection you have to somebody becomes that much more important. And so that's how we kind of got to this. That's why we think about it. And yeah, that's kind of the backbone.
I love it. When you're creating, you're kind of like presenting this promised land where companies can create trust through video. What's the old world? What's the status quo that you guys are fighting against that kind of creates that first step of the story, right? Like the first image of this movie where at the end you guys can bring people into the promised land. If we backtrack it, what's the status quo that we're fighting against?
We're just fighting against the fact that anyone can write anything on the internet, basically. When there was not a lot of competition for things or there's one product in a category, it might be enough just to say like, hey, we're the best website chat you can get. But it turns out anyone can write that. It's too easy. So when anyone can write it and everyone does write it, the question just becomes how do you stand out and how do you make something that's meaningful?
I love it. It seems like, I know that you've run Wistia for, I think, 17 years. Correct me if I'm wrong.
In about a week, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Happy birthday, I guess. Yeah. So, kind of. How has the story evolved? Is the story different today than what it was 17 days ago?
Yeah.
Oh, tell me about that.
Yeah. I mean, so when we were starting, it was a lot of it was companies who wanted to use video and couldn't even afford to make the video. So we would talk to them like, hey, you want to do this? Like, God, this sounds so great. Great. Like, but I don't have 25 grand to make a launch video. I don't have 50 grand to make it. I was like, oh, interesting. And then we watched that change with basically people using DSLRs. When DSLR started to add video functionality, that was a big step change in terms of how much it costs to make a great video and how to make a video look great. And then we watched that change again with iPhones. And then we're watching it change again right now with the webcam, actually, and your screen, right? Like you and I are talking remotely. It's an expectation that, of course, we can record a podcast together remotely. I have no idea where you are. You have no idea where I am. And it's totally fine. And we could record something that sounds really good and looks really good. That's very recent. Like we're talking really since COVID that everyone has kind of woken up to this. And so the change has been enormous in what it costs to make a video, which then changes where you think about using video, when you shouldn't use video. which changes so many different things and expectations. And so it's gone from like me trying to convince people and them saying it sounds a great idea, but like I'm never going to do that, to people being completely sold. And a lot of the stuff that holds people back today is actually that fear that they're going to hurt their brand, or they're going to be afraid to get on camera. It's this like instinctual, like, well, I don't like to give talks, so why can I do this? Like, why should we do this? And if that's your feeling, it becomes very easy to convince yourself that you shouldn't use video in lots of places, even though we live in a world where the audience is in control. The audience gets to choose, right? And like, you get to choose, your audience gets to decide, do they want to watch, do they want to listen, do they want to read? And if you don't give them all those options, you're missing out.
Amazing. When we talk to companies here in the podcast, there's always a change that allows this new world, this promised land, to become true, right? Like the democratization of video. For you guys, it seems like it was the one thing that kind of was the inflection point where it's not just a dream that we could do this, it's now an expectation, really.
Yeah, and it's still happening. And I think that's one of the other interesting things about having done this for long enough, that it keeps changing and evolving. And like, the next thing that's coming is AI. And like, how will AI help us all make better quality stuff more easily?
Yeah, even like video editing, right? Like right now, CapCut is empowering millions of kids in all around the world to make really good videos.
Yeah,
like movie-worthy level editing videos from their phone.
Yeah,
which is incredible. I wonder how does the story come to be, right? Like when you're thinking about early days, like 17 years ago. Where do you see that moment where you're like, oh, here's an opportunity for us to tap into it? Is this a personal like hero's journey that you're seeing and then that takes you forward? Like, where does the inception of this story come from?
I think anything like this, it comes out of direct experience, and it comes out of, hard-won lessons. And, for us, it's like we tried things that we didn't expect to work, that worked way better than we thought. Like,
amazing.
We did one-off things. I'll give you an example of the first time I really saw the power of video. And this is coming from a filmmaker, like I had made films and worked on that before Wistia. And I'd seen that you could get an audience excited, and I'd seen, I was really excited about the storytelling part of it. But then when I was in the shoes of running the business, it was like, still felt like, oh, is this going to be good for us? Is it not? We made screencasts were our first types of videos at Wistia, as me doing demos of the product, because before that we did demos in person, or we did demos on like whatever it was back then, like WebEx or something. And when we did a demo, people would buy. So I was like, I should make demo videos. So I did that, and it definitely helped, but it didn't like change the game. And then we had a video that someone came and shot for us where they just shot video of us working. We were about 7 people on the team. We were wandering around the office, and this guy came and was like, I think I can make like a really fun video that kind of shows the vibe here. And it's like me flying like a remote control helicopter, and it's just all this goofy stuff. But it definitely has nothing to do with what our actual product is. Just to be clear, nothing. There's no demo of the product. It doesn't say buy Wistia, doesn't say anything. It's just like
engaging.
It's just engaging fun behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So it seemed honestly pointless. There was no plan. Like the guy who shot it didn't really have much of a plan either. He just wanted to show us that he could make something pretty. Well, we put this up on our team page. It's like, hey, this is what it's like to work at Wistia. And it went viral, and it drove a ton of traffic. And then a bunch of people signed up about our product. Amazing. And I was like, this is insane.
What's happening?
Yeah, what's happening? At that point, I probably had spent 3 years trying to convince people to buy the product by talking about the product. And now I'm not talking about the product at all. Some guy makes this fun video with music and people buy. And it was this huge, like, eye-opening moment of, we underestimate the power of brand, and we underestimate the power of the human connection. And just seeing these people, it just created trust, and it was kind of engaging and fun. And then if you look at from that thread up to things like 110, 100 and all the other wild stuff we've done, you could see how it's actually just been a constant evolution, but it came from these hard-won lessons and feeling it and understanding intuitively that like turned the light bulb on. And then suddenly it was so obvious that we could use it everywhere. We could take all these risks, and it would all build the brand. It would all help.
I love it. I do want to talk about your video series and your podcast in a second, but just finishing the theme around story and brand. If you do a quick Google search, it says that competitors at Vimeo, Vidyard, and all this. How much do you compare yourselves to the competitors, or how defensible is your brand story versus other competitors in the space? Do you feel like you're on a features to features competition with them, or do you feel like you're completely separated of what they're doing?
I mean, I think there's two ways to look at it. There's the brand perspective and there's the feature perspective. And I would say from the feature perspective, we have parity or are better for marketers in a bunch of different ways, right? And obviously we believe that, but we work hard to do that. And even like how integrated our platform is, like that's one of the other things that's a big differentiator, is like all the pieces fit really well together and you can access all the things in one place. But from a brand perspective, I think our challenge is very similar to a lot of challenges that people have, which is like you're in a category, there's a bunch of other folks. What actually makes you different? It turns out you can't copy someone else's founder story. You can't copy someone else's values and just have them show up. You have to actually live them and breathe them. And so things that we've been able to do from a brand perspective, a lot of creative risks we've taken, 1:100 is a feature-length film. Gear Squad versus Dr. Boring is our animated series about production equipment that comes to life. We've made tons of content teaching people how to get on camera, make things look good, whatever, and earned a lot of trust doing that. That stuff is actually very, very hard to copy. And so our brand is very different from those other folks. And the key for us is getting someone involved in just like engaging. And it's not engaging just the product. That's great too. But the first thing we need is someone to come in and just press play on one of those things. And then that usually you start to feel the difference pretty quickly.
I love it. You've tweeted before that people, and I'll just quote it, people don't want to engage with faceless brands. They want to connect with individuals. I talk a lot about founders needing to be the chief storytelling officers of their companies. You are a host at Talking Too Loud podcast. What's the role of the founder in telling the story of the company, right? And obviously we're both founders. I run a marketing company. We have tons of things to do. Why should we prioritize storytelling and content and sharing our story out there?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this two ways. One, early stage, and then late stage. Early stage, there's no one else. You got to do it. Like it's kind of that simple. It's like you can be your differentiator. And we see this in a lot of markets. And actually it's like you need to make the time because like you have to find ways of differentiating yourselves and standing out. And you can do it with your product too, but actually being in a feature war is not very fun. And go one feature, the other feature, one feature. The truth is usually it isn't just one feature why someone buys a product. It's the overall experience, and it's actually the perceived roadmap, especially in SaaS. It's like if you sign up with Wistia today, you should make a bet on whether or not Wistia is the right place by going and looking at our updates page that shows you how much stuff we're launching. And you should look at that and be like, I see they're making all these changes. I see the direction they're going in. What do I think this could be in 2 or 3 years? Because you're basically signing up for a subscription now that you hopefully will keep using then. So you should make your decision based on that. And being the founder at the early stage is a way to tell that story. It's a way to help people see what you care about, what you don't care about, things you're going to get into, things you're not going to get into. Okay, now let's go late stage. What's the same? Well, if you're a public company, guess what? You got to tell that story. And you get out there and often you're telling the world something at a very similar rate that you're telling your internal team. And the market corrects your value based on what you say you're going to do. And then you either have funded the thing you're funded the thing that your team is going to go do, or you've seen that people don't like this thing. And a lot of really big companies, we often judge what is going to happen based on the individuals. So what is Apple under Tim Cook, right? If there's a lot of articles that are written about what is Tim Cook into? Oh, Tim Cook is way more into health than Steve Jobs. And it makes sense. The Apple Watch, it's like pushing the limit, blah, 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 right? And Tesla with Elon and then Twitter, right? And all this stuff. It's like, well, what is Elon going to do to Twitter? And what's his opinions? And like, is he not putting as much time into Tesla? And like, are his values changing? And it's having a very direct impact on stock price, on orders, on where people are spending their time, on all of these things. So this is not, the point is there's always people want someone in a brand that they can try to understand if they care about the brand and they care about the category. If they don't, sure. If it's just the cheapest thing, they don't care. But if you're actually not trying to be the cheapest, having a person and values that are out there, I think is a really important thing because it helps everybody understand what they're trying to do. And it turns out that that's really, really important. And then when you think about it that way, it's also one of the only things that nobody else can do, right? Like it's, if you look at your schedule, it's like, what can I uniquely do? It's the rare company or organization where there are tons of other people that can do that. And so for that reason, I think it's just crazy important to be spending some time on.
And it's going back to like what you were mentioning about trust, right? Like the value of trust coming from an individual is so much stronger than coming from a brand. Doesn't mean that like your brand needs to have value and trust by itself, right? But like as a founder, I think you can exponentially increase that. Like with Wistia, like knowing you, that increases the trust 10x of like just Wistia by itself, right? And I think that's one of the things that founders need to spend more time doing. One of the things that you spend time doing is hosting the Talking Too Loud podcast. You also have this video series, and as somebody that's involved in content, I want to hear your perspective on how do you differentiate between podcasting and shows, right? Are they the same thing? Do you consider them as two different buckets? I consider them two different buckets, and shows being the evolution of podcasting. But how do you kind of say it?
I kind of say them as the versions of the same thing. I go back to actually just that, like, your audience is in control. And I think as creators, that's what we have to remember all the time. Like, they get to swipe away, they get to pause. They are opting in. They're in control. And then you have to, the other thing that you learn, and this is not rocket science, people learn in different ways. Some people are really visual learners. Some people are better when they're listening. Some people are better when they're reading. And I think when you look at the world, it's like, all right, you have a diverse group of people. They learn in different ways. Anyone in B2B, if you're watching this, like you're hopefully doing that because you're trying to glean some kind of nugget, some kind of insight for your own business, for the way you operate, for something you do. So everyone's in learning mode. And that means you have to give them options. And so I look at it as like, I have a podcast, Talking Too Loud. For me, it's kind of like part of my own journey of how I learn. I love doing it. I love having the conversations with folks. You know, like the episode that just came out today, the day we're recording, is Des Trainer from Intercom, one of the co-founders, talking about scaling, and they've adopted AI really quickly, and why and how and what that's going to do to the market. And we're talking about a lot of stuff where the answers are actually not clear. And for me, that's like the most interesting stuff, is like we're actually talking it out. You can listen to that in podcast form and get it wherever you get podcasts. If that's the way you like to do it, you can watch it because there's video versions of every episode that are on Wistia.com and are also on YouTube, because a lot of people engage like that. And because you have the transcript, some people will just scan the transcript and search through it and try to find like the insights that way. So for me, it's just, you give them all of those pieces. I think the interesting question is, like, if you're going to make a show, what is something that there's enough opportunity to go deep on, that you can keep going, that's actually genuinely interesting for the people who are making it. And then if you can do that, like you have a thread that you can go deep enough on, and it's actually interesting enough to the people who are making it, then you can commit to doing it for long enough that you can actually iterate and learn and figure out how to make it better. And a lot of the challenges that people run into is they get 3, 4, 5 episodes into something, and then they just stop. And, you know, I look at it actually like when we decided to do Talking to It, I think we're on episode like 74 or something. We said we're going to give this a minimum of 100 episodes. And then when we looked at it like that, well, if we're going to do a minimum of 100, I better freaking care about what this is.
Might as well like it.
And so then it turns out, what do I care about? I am constantly working to grow and evolve Wistia. And so me on my journey of learning, that is actually what this is. And it turns out it's this ultimate beautiful hack, because I get to talk to experts all the time about this stuff, and they want to have the conversation. And so it's like this beautiful little cycle that just keeps scaling, and it keeps getting more engaging and more fun for me. And then ultimately, you do it long enough, you get the insight on like what's working in the episodes, you change the format, you change distribution strategies, yada, yada. And then, you know, at least we're fortunate that's actually working and scaling, which is lovely. But I go back to those core inputs, like, do you actually enjoy it? And is it a thread that you can go deep enough on?
A couple follow-up questions. I know we're nearing the top of the hour. How much do you compare? I mean, how one of the things that you consider is, how much do you like it? How deep can you get into it? Do you consider how close it is to your core offering and your product?
Of course. Yeah.
How do you balance those?
I think it's, I think
or where do you start first?
Yeah. So I think where you should start is, why do people pay attention to brands? Why do they pay attention to products or companies? I would argue that you can make an incredible content. You can do incredible brand work. If your product isn't actually shipping and moving, there's not as much reason for people to pay attention to it. So they might pay attention at first, you have a great product, but if you don't keep working on having a great product, if you don't keep shipping value, it's harder to get people to pay as much attention. And so the reason is, of course, if you're actually shipping value, that's the thing that's going to save someone time. That's the thing that's going to make someone money. That's the thing that's going to get someone a promotion. That's the thing, if you're in B2C, that's going to make someone, feel differentiated or special or whatever. So it's like, that's like the core engine. When you're making content, it can be pretty close to the product if you are bringing enough behind the scenes and enough into your thought process. I think it's almost like what I've seen is the bigger the company gets, and the more we have systems and people who are focused really tightly on all those other things, it moves more towards like brand and audience, which is great. But because that's, we're looking at like how many people are engaging with Talking Too Loud and how many people are engaging with me on LinkedIn and Twitter and these different platforms, and also how they're engaging with the Wistia brand. And there's very different patterns that we see across these two groups, like between like me as like thought leader and as the brand as thought leader. And so now we're like, that's shaping how we think about which content should be in the show. And we do both, honestly. So we do episodes where my co-founder comes on or people internally come on about why we did something or how it's going. And we go really far removed when we're never talking about Wistia. That's most of the episodes, is just talking about like learning what's happening in the industry and stuff like that.
Amazing. Final question before we let you go. You're one of the few B2B companies that thinks like a media company and invests in producing the shows and podcasts as a media company. How do you measure that it's working towards top of line revenue or bottom revenue? Is there certain KPIs that you guys track? This is working versus it's not working?
Yeah, so it just depends where you are in the journey of this type of content brand building. The way it always starts is it's qualitative first, and then once you have enough data, becomes quantitative, right? So for us, is this coming up in sales calls? Are people referencing it on the site? Do people reply to the emails we send? And then we actually, not to pitch my own product, but our podcast is hosted and managed with Wistia. And one of the things that's nice about that is that we have like a channel on our site that you can go to. Talking Too Loud is what you'd look for, that you can find on the footer on wistia.com. We see how much traffic goes there and then how it converts and signs up. And then we also look at the distribution between how much people are engaging on, like watching or listening on wistia.com versus in podcast apps. And so this is our example, but this is the trend that we've seen. When you launch something, the way it usually starts is like, if you have any existing audience, like you have a product and people are coming, it usually starts with people engaging with it on your site. So when we launched Talking Too Loud, 90% of the watching and listening in the first month was on our site and 10% was in the podcast apps. Today, it is like 10, 15% of the site and 90% of the podcast apps.
Super quick question. Would you rather more people watching on the site just because it's closer to the next step?
That is,
or do you like it on social apps?
Yes, that does make it easier to just like see conversions and stuff. But what we've seen is that we can take a guess at how the whole audience is acting based on the percentage that's engaging on the site. And then, so we start qualitative, and then over time the quantitative. So now we can tell, we know we get customers because of Talking Too Loud. We know that the conversion rate is different if you've engaged with Talking Too Loud than if you haven't. And then we see that most of this is happening in the podcast apps, which means that a lot of the impact is happening at a place where we can't track it. And that's actually okay. And so you put it together, and even if you look at like, it's like a fifth of everything else, it still makes really good sense to do. And so you keep doing it. And it's just really how you start versus how you kind of finish or keep going. And I think I encourage anybody, when you're launching something, it doesn't have to be a podcast, it almost always starts qualitative. And if it's early and new and different, you have to pay really, really close attention to the qualitative. But if you get 10 people that are telling you they love this thing, that's
a good sign.
That's a lot better than 0. It's a lot better than 5. And if you can get 10, you could probably get 100. And that's the classic thing, is like, you just have to start with those building blocks like that. And then over time, it's also, we see it on social engagement because we take clips of all the episodes. And so we post that on social. We looked at we will look at each episode, which clips get the most engagement, what types of things happen. We send emails out to people because people can subscribe via email, which also means that we can do surveys of the audience. So we do surveys to see and so you put all the pieces together, it becomes really clear how it's working.
I love it. Chris, thank you so much for being here, man. We covered a lot. This was a great episode. Thank you so much for sharing so transparently how you guys do things.
Oh, happy to. Thanks for having me.